The early morning rush at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport was a familiar rhythm of chaos and order, all tangled in a symphony of flight announcements, rolling suitcases, and travelers hurrying to their gates with tired eyes and coffee cups in hand. It was 6:27 a.m., and the air in Terminal B carried the scent of cinnamon rolls, overbrewed espresso, and the electric buzz of impatience. Somewhere in that blur of bodies and urgency stood Malcolm Pierce, tall, composed, and entirely unremarkable to the eye. He wore a gray hoodie, black jeans, and scuffed sneakers. His duffel bag hung loosely off one shoulder. He looked like a man heading to a funeral or a red-eye flight. Nothing about him called attention. And that was the point. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who didn't need to prove himself. Yet in that moment, he wasn't Malcolm the traveler. He was Malcolm the ghost. An invisible man in plain sight. Because today, Malcolm was on assignment, sent by the FAA to investigate a string of complaints from passengers alleging racial bias and mistreatment at this very airline, at this very gate. He'd chosen this flight intentionally, a business-class seat on Flight 293 to Dallas, booked under a name he hadn't used in over a decade. His mission: blend in, observe, document, and if necessary, intervene. As the final boarding call echoed through the concourse, Malcolm stepped into the Group A boarding line. Passengers in suits and designer carry-ons chatted around him. No one acknowledged his presence. That, too, was typical. He waited his turn, quietly studying the gate agent ahead. She was in her early 30s, maybe, with tightly pulled back blonde hair, thick mascara, and a blue blazer with the airline's winged logo. Her name tag read, M. Sanders. She looked bored, irritated, checking her smartwatch more than the passengers' tickets. She scanned boarding passes with robotic efficiency, but something about her changed when Malcolm stepped up. She didn't look at his boarding pass right away. Instead, her eyes flicked to his face, then his clothes, then his sneakers. A subtle frown formed. She stepped back slightly, as though he were out of place. Like he didn't belong in her line. Her words were the first red flag. "Sir, this is priority boarding. Group A only," she said without checking anything. Malcolm gave a polite nod and held out his boarding pass and passport. "That's me," he said evenly. "Business class." She hesitated. Her eyes narrowed as she reluctantly took his documents. There was no smile. No welcome. She held the passport in her hands like it was counterfeit, scrutinizing it more than necessary, flipping it back and forth. "This looks fake," she muttered under her breath, but loud enough for Malcolm to hear. He tilted his head slightly. "I assure you, it's real." She let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Uh-huh. And I'm the Queen of England." Passengers behind Malcolm shuffled impatiently. A man in a suit glanced over, frowned at the delay. Malcolm kept his voice calm, measured. "Is there a problem with my ticket?" She waved the boarding pass in the air. "You can't just show up with some cheap printout and expect to walk into business class. I've seen these scams before." Another woman in line stepped closer, confused. "But he's in Group A, right? Can't you just scan it?" Sanders shot the woman a glare and then, in a flash of frustration and authority flexing, she did the unthinkable. Without warning, she ripped the passport in half, right down the middle, and tossed it into the trash beside her desk like it was nothing but junk mail. The gasps were immediate, loud, sharp. Audible shock echoed across the gate as half a dozen travelers witnessed the scene. One woman dropped her phone. A man let out a curse. Another passenger began recording with trembling hands. Malcolm stared at the trash can, frozen. The two halves of his passport lay crumpled among coffee cups and food wrappers. He felt the burn rise in his chest, not from shame, but from the restraint it took not to unleash the storm inside him. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he asked, voice low, deliberate. "I'm doing my job," Sanders said, stepping back, her voice rising defensively. "You people always try to pull something. I've seen this trick before." "You people," Malcolm echoed slowly. "I don't have to take this abuse," she snapped, glancing toward security. "If you don't leave now, I'll have you removed from the terminal." A silence fell that didn't belong to airports. It was the kind of quiet that comes before something irreversible. Malcolm reached slowly into the inner pocket of his hoodie, pulling out a slim leather case the color of night. He flipped it open and held it out with the smoothness of a practiced hand. His voice never rose. "My name is Malcolm Pierce. I'm a senior inspector with the Federal Aviation Administration. Badge number 647F. I am here on assignment, undercover, to investigate employee behavior at this gate. And what you've just done, Ms. Sanders, is not only a violation of civil rights policy, but also a federal offense." The silence shattered like glass. Gasps turned into muttered outrage. Phones were held higher. The man in the suit stepped back, eyes wide. Someone whispered, "Oh my God, he's FAA." Sanders froze. The color drained from her face, replaced by something like nausea and disbelief. Her mouth moved, but no words came out. For the first time, she seemed unsure of her own authority. She stammered. "You can't just, this is a mistake, I didn't know." "That's the point," Malcolm said, sliding the badge back into his jacket with precision. "You didn't care to know." Behind him, murmurs rippled through the crowd like a spreading flame. "She ripped a federal inspector's passport. This is insane. He was just standing there. Record everything." A supervisor came sprinting from the side gate, having seen the growing crowd. She pushed through to the front. "What's going on?" she asked breathlessly. "This employee just destroyed federal property, racially profiled a passenger, and tried to have him removed for having the audacity to exist," Malcolm replied without raising his voice. "Is this true?" the supervisor asked, eyes darting from Malcolm to Sanders. I didn't know," Sanders said weakly. He looked suspicious. You thought he couldn't afford the seat because of how he looked?" Malcolm asked sharply. "Because he wasn't wearing a suit. Because of the color of his skin." The supervisor's face twisted in horror as she turned to Sanders. "Get away from the counter. Now." But, now, 2 airport security officers arrived, confused at first, but quickly filled in as passengers explained what happened in overlapping shouts. Sanders was escorted away. Her feet dragged. Her head hung. She didn't cry, yet. But her confidence had evaporated completely. The supervisor turned back to Malcolm. "Sir, on behalf of the airline, I can't express how sorry we are." "I'm not here for apologies," Malcolm interrupted. "I'm here for documentation. I'll need all CCTV footage from this gate for the past hour. Every log, every audio feed, every personnel record of everyone working this terminal today. I'll also need a secure place to conduct interviews. Starting with her manager. I assume that's you." She nodded silently, visibly shaken. Her professionalism fractured under the weight of what had just occurred. Malcolm exhaled slowly, looking down at the trash can beside him. His passport, now unusable, lay desecrated in its plastic grave. It wasn't the document that mattered. It was the symbolism, the ease with which his identity had been dismissed. Torn, thrown away. A woman approached him quietly from behind. She looked to be in her 60s, white-haired and grandmotherly, holding her phone tightly. "I just want to say, thank you," she said, voice trembling. "People like her get away with it too often. No one ever stops them. But thank you for staying calm." Malcolm gave her a small nod. It shouldn't take a badge to be treated like a human being. He turned toward the waiting area, now eerily still. Dozens of eyes followed him, not out of suspicion, but of newfound respect, guilt, awe, or some mixture of all three. The flight was delayed. The gate was closed. But something much bigger than a plane schedule had shifted. As Malcolm followed the supervisor toward a side room, he glanced one last time at the counter where it all began. Where a judgment had been made in under 10 seconds. Where a woman with too much power and too little compassion had tried to humiliate a man she believed was beneath her. But she picked the wrong man. Because Malcolm Pierce wasn't just another passenger. He was the storm. Quiet, controlled, and absolutely unstoppable. Of course. Here is part 2 of the story. Gate agent rips up black man's passport, not knowing he's the FAA inspector in disguise, expanded into a complete 2,000-word narrative, written without any headings. The side room was small, barely the size of a conference office, but private enough to hold the conversation that was about to unfold. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as the airline supervisor led Malcolm inside. Her name was Rhonda Kelser. Her hands trembled as she offered him a seat, eyes darting everywhere except his. The room smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant and stale coffee. A single camera stared down from the ceiling, capturing every second. Malcolm chose the chair nearest the wall, leaned back slowly, and crossed one leg over the other. His presence filled the room without effort. Calm, but dangerous. Rhonda closed the door behind them. "Mr. Pierce," she began, her voice shaky, "I had no idea." "If I had known, you wouldn't have done anything," Malcolm interrupted quietly. "Not until it went viral. Not until your employee became a liability." Rhonda froze, her mouth still open. She nodded once, like a child caught lying. He continued, "So let me save us time. I don't want excuses. I don't need tears. I need facts." She swallowed hard. "Understood. I need to know how many formal complaints have been filed against the gate agent, Michelle Sanders, over the last 6 months." Rhonda hesitated. I don't have that exact number right now. Estimate," Malcolm cut in. 5, she said. "Possibly 6. All similar in nature. Allegations of rudeness. 1 mentioned racial language. 2 involved improper ID handling. But none resulted in termination." Malcolm's eyebrows rose slightly. 5 complaints, no disciplinary action. "She completed a retraining module," Rhonda said. "She was warned, verbally." He exhaled sharply through his nose, not out of surprise, but disappointment. "So the problem wasn't today. The problem is you've been allowing it." Rhonda said nothing. The truth was already there, hanging like a thick fog between them. Malcolm pulled out his FAA-issued tablet and began tapping quickly. "I'm escalating this report to Tier 1 Federal Review," he said. "Effective immediately. I'll be recommending a temporary shutdown of this terminal's outbound service for a full inspection." Rhonda's eyes widened. "That will delay over 60 flights today alone." "That's not my concern," Malcolm replied. "My concern is that an employee of your airline destroyed a government-issued passport, falsely accused a customer of fraud, and did so in front of multiple witnesses, all because of the way he looked. You understand how that sounds in front of Congress, right?" Rhonda's throat clicked as she nodded slowly. "Yes, I understand." "Good," Malcolm said. "Because this is bigger than one gate agent. This is about systemic behavior and corporate negligence. And if it hadn't been me, if it had been a student or someone undocumented or someone without a camera rolling, what would have happened then?" Rhonda lowered her gaze. "They would have been removed. No flight. No justice." He nodded, tapping again. "Which means my report will also include a review of your employee evaluation protocols, your training content, and your internal response time to customer complaints." A knock came at the door. One of the airline's legal officers entered, accompanied by an airport security captain. They had been briefed and were now requesting to debrief Malcolm in return. Malcolm rose from his chair, nodded respectfully, and offered his badge again. The legal officer's eyes lingered on it just a second longer than necessary. It was clear he recognized the weight of the badge, not just the title, but the authority that came with it. Not many people in the industry had the power to ground flights, shut down terminals, or revoke licenses with a signature. Malcolm Pierce did. Once the formal questioning started, it was clinical. Malcolm explained the encounter, every word, every movement. The legal officer took notes in silence. The security captain added time stamps to the recorded footage. After nearly an hour, they were done. But Malcolm wasn't. "I'd like to speak with her," he said, looking at Rhonda. "Michelle?" Rhonda asked, surprised. "She's in a holding room now, with our and union representation. I'm not here to fire her. I just want to look her in the eye." There was hesitation, then a silent nod. 15 minutes later, Malcolm was led to another private room down the hall. Michelle Sanders sat alone, her blazer crumpled, her mascara streaked. Her eyes were red. A paper cup of water sat untouched beside her. She looked up as he entered. There was a brief flicker of confusion, then recognition, then shame. He sat across from her, arms resting calmly on the table. No hostility. No vengeance in his expression. Just silence. She spoke first. I didn't know. He stared at her. Didn't know what? Didn't know you were someone important. His face hardened. And if I wasn't? She flinched. I just thought. You didn't think, he said flatly. You judged. And then you acted with power you didn't deserve to hold. I've been working this job for 10 years, she said, voice trembling. I've seen things. People trying to sneak through with fake IDs, forged documents. And how many of those people looked like me? He asked, his voice now quiet, almost soft. She didn't answer. That's what I thought, he said. Michelle covered her face with her hands, but Malcolm continued, his voice steady. This isn't about whether or not I'm important. It's about whether or not you treat every person with the decency they're entitled to. Not because of who they are, but because of who you are. She sobbed once, quietly. I didn't mean to ruin your passport. I snapped. I felt pressure. There were so many people. You felt powerful, Malcolm said. And you used that power to diminish someone you didn't respect. She looked up, tears brimming. I'm going to lose my job. That's not up to me, Malcolm said, rising. But if you do, let it be a lesson in humility, not a punishment. You were given authority. You used it to humiliate a stranger. And if it weren't for a badge, I'd be another story no one believed. He turned and left the room, the door clicking shut behind him. Outside, the terminal had changed. The news had broken already. His phone buzzed with emails and interview requests. Videos of the incident had gone viral, spreading across social media like wildfire. Hashtags were trending. Activists were weighing in. Headlines read, FAA inspector profiled at airport, passport torn in public humiliation. Malcolm ignored them all. He had one more thing to do. He returned to the gate. The scene was mostly cleared now. Flights were rerouted. Employees were silent. A new gate agent, nervous but professional, nodded politely as he passed. Passengers still loitered, whispering as they spotted him. A young black teenager approached slowly, maybe 17 or 18. He wore headphones around his neck and a NASA hoodie. He looked up at Malcolm like he was staring at a superhero. Sir, the boy said. That was amazing. What you did. Malcolm smiled faintly. What I did should have never been necessary. I know, the boy said. But still, you stood up. You showed them who you were. I didn't show them who I was, Malcolm said, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. I showed them who they were. The boy nodded, eyes wide. I wanna be like you one day. No, Malcolm replied. Be better. He walked away, heading toward the lounge where FAA agents were waiting for final protocol reviews. As he disappeared down the corridor, the echo of his presence lingered behind, like thunder after lightning. People remembered. People whispered. And for once, they saw clearly. He hadn't yelled. He hadn't thrown a punch. He hadn't needed to. All he'd done was hold up a mirror. And what people saw in that reflection was the part that haunted them. Because Malcolm Pierce wasn't a victim. He was the reckoning.